I hope you all enjoyed the catered shrimp. Karen smirked into the mic, raising her champagne glass to a crowd of folding chair royalty seated beneath twinkling stage lights. That's when the lights blinked once. Then again. Then every speaker popped with a crack like a firecracker. The music stopped. The projector died. The champagne fountain wheezed. And the entire HOA board meeting was plunged into a blackout, right as Karen began to read the motion to seize my land. Some screamed. Some groaned. One poor guy tripped over a riser and face-planted into a tray of deviled eggs. I stood behind the fence, holding a remote in one hand and a thermos in the other, and whispered to myself, "Let's begin." But to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the first white line they painted on my field. It started on a Thursday. A normal, slightly irritating Thursday. I came back from a 4-day out-of-town conference, an engineering summit in Denver, only to find my peaceful, grassy field covered in white paint. Parking lines. Dozens of them. Sloppy but official-looking rectangles lined up from edge to edge, snaking through the eastern corner of my property like some twisted suburban barcode. And it wasn't just the lines. Someone had hammered in wooden stakes with laminated signs that read, HOA Overflow Parking, and even Board Member Reserved. There was an orange traffic cone with a sad balloon attached to it. I stood there, blinking at it all like I was hallucinating, trying to figure out if this was some absurd prank or if a paint-huffing marching band had lost its way. It didn't take long before the true source of this stupidity emerged. Karen, HOA President, Alpha Clipboard Wielder, an undisputed queen of overreach. She came waddling over from the subdivision entrance like she owned gravity. Tracksuit shimmering in the sun. Sunglasses 3 times too large for her head. Clipboard held like a holy book of judgment. She greeted me with that fake tight smile people use when they're 2 seconds away from stabbing you with policy. "Oh hi. We didn't think you'd be back until next week," she said, not even pretending to be apologetic. "The board voted to use the field temporarily. You weren't using it. We figured it could benefit the community." The sheer audacity of it was stunning. My family has owned this land since 1972. The subdivision didn't even exist until 2003. The field sits just outside the HOA boundary, technically part of the old rural zoning that still grants me livestock rights, utility routing, and unrestricted land use. They had no claim, no permission, not even a conversation. And yet here I was, standing on my own land, listening to this woman explain how she and her clipboard decided it now belonged to a committee vote. I asked her politely, at first, who authorized the paint. She cheerily said, "Well, I had my nephew do it. He runs a small contracting thing. No permit. No paperwork. Just nephew." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I've learned that rage only fuels her. So I smiled, nodded, said okay, got it. Then I turned around, walked into my workshop garage, and grabbed my folder. The folder. The one every landowner with an HOA next door should keep. It contained the property deed, zoning maps, county tax records, and, most importantly, original utility blueprints from the Cold War days when this area served as a military comms outpost. And right beneath their shiny new parking lot? A retired but still live electrical bypass grid. My grid. My switch. My land. The best part? They had no clue. Over the next few days, I documented everything. Every car parked on my field. Every board member giving tours. Every folding table, speaker wire, balloon arch, and signpost. They were prepping for some big event, a re-election gala or community awards night. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. They were about to celebrate HOA leadership excellence, while standing on ground they literally trespassed on. One afternoon, I watched Karen direct a vendor van into my side fence so they could install a stage. The driver hesitated. Karen waved her clipboard like it was a badge. I filmed the whole thing. The fence cracked. They didn't even apologize. They just kept going. By Saturday, the situation had become absurd. Someone installed a portable toilet next to my apple tree. Another HOA rep drove rebar through the roots to stake down a canopy tent. And all the while I said nothing. Because I had a plan. Not a petty revenge plan. A surgical one. One that hit the nerve that HOA board members fear most. Their power. Literal power. I spent the next night inspecting the old utility junction box at the base of the hill. The grid had been decommissioned decades ago, but I'd restored portions of it for my own use, workshop tools, irrigation timers, and a weather station I'd been running for a local science club. It was legal. It was isolated. And most importantly, it gave me access to the emergency override panel just under their newly decorated parking area. If I rerouted the flow and initiated a controlled switch drop, it wouldn't cause permanent damage, but it would cut every watt of electricity they were siphoning from the nearby subdivision transformer. And so I waited. Sunday came. The event was set. Folding chairs covered the field. Karen wore a bedazzled sash that said, "Madam President." There was even a stage crew rigging lights to a portable DJ tent. I walked by and waved. She waved back with that same smugness, no idea what was coming. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the field glowed with lights and speakers. People laughed, toasted champagne. Someone gave a speech about community unity and shared vision. I watched from my porch, flipping the switch cover up on my control box. I waited until Karen held up the microphone and declared, "Let this meeting of the board commence." Then I pressed the button, and the night split in half. The silence after the blackout was almost beautiful. It lasted just long enough to make people uncomfortable, long enough for all those HOA loyalists sitting in their little fold-up chairs to start glancing around nervously. The generator Karen had rented for the big event kicked in with a struggling cough, sputtered, and died with a dramatic puff of smoke. Someone near the snack table yelped when the popcorn machine sparked. It was like karma had learned to do synchronized dancing. I didn't move. I just watched from the edge of my property line, leaning on the same wooden fence they'd backed a delivery truck into 2 days earlier. The field, now cast in dim twilight, looked like the final scene of a bad reality show, the part where everyone gets eliminated at once. But this wasn't just a blackout. This was a statement. My field. My rules. Of course, no HOA drama would be complete without Karen stumbling out of the chaos, waving her clipboard like it was a lightsaber. "Everyone, stay calm," she shrieked. "This is just a technical issue. Probably the vendor's fault." She stormed over to the generator, yelling at the tech guy who clearly had no idea why half the wiring was completely dead. He flipped open the panel, shined a flashlight inside, and gave her a sheepish shrug. "The lines are good," he said. "But there's no feed from the grid. It's like it got rerouted or shut off." Karen's face twisted, and for the first time, the fake leadership mask cracked. She was rattled. While they scrambled, I took the opportunity to head into my garage and pull out the folder again. I didn't just have documents this time. I had timestamps, photos, and witness statements. My neighbor Earl had even texted me a blurry but glorious shot of Karen personally taping a sign to my fence. It read, "HOA event parking, enter here," and included a hand-drawn arrow. My lawyer was going to love that one. But this wasn't about lawsuits, at least, not yet. This was about peeling back the curtain and showing everyone who they'd been following all this time. Not a leader. Not a protector of property values. Just a power-hungry micromanager who finally tripped over the very line she painted. Karen must have sensed something was wrong beyond a power hiccup, because she started looking around wildly, barking orders to her board members. That's when her eyes locked on me. I gave her a friendly wave. No malice. No anger. Just calm acknowledgement. She narrowed her eyes like she was trying to scan my brain with laser vision. But it was too late for suspicion. The stage lights were dead. The mics were out. The music was gone. And she had a crowd of confused homeowners starting to murmur things like, "Didn't he own this field?" And "I thought she said it was public use." Doubt is a funny thing. It spreads quietly like smoke, until suddenly everything feels like it might be on fire. The next morning, the HOA had a full-blown meltdown. I watched from my porch with a coffee mug and binoculars as the board members argued near the community clubhouse. Karen looked like she hadn't slept. Her signature bun was unraveling like a defeated pastry. She paced back and forth, yelling into her phone, probably calling every electrician within a 50-mile radius. Meanwhile, two board members, Stuart and Melanie, were having a hushed but very intense conversation under a tree. Stuart was the treasurer. Melanie was the one who originally told the board they could, probably, use my land if it wasn't clearly marked. Now, Melanie looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole and stay there. I decided it was time to make my move. Not with noise or threats. With cold, hard facts. I printed out enlarged aerial photos from Google Earth with timestamps showing my field as private property. I added the property deed, photos of the damaged fence, images of the parking lines with their signs, and finally, a full color-coded zoning map showing the clear boundary line that the HOA had stomped all over. Then, just for flair, I included a still from my security footage, Karen directing a delivery truck onto my grass like a parking lot valet. I slid the folder into a clear binder and dropped it into the HOA mailbox with a sticky note that read, "Thought you'd need this. Especially page 7. Later that day, a knock came at my door. It wasn't Karen. It was Stuart. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since last night. "Can we talk?" he asked, eyes already pleading. I stepped out onto the porch, leaned on the rail, and nodded. "Sure," I said, "but only if we're being honest." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I had no idea it was your property," he admitted. "Karen said it was unclaimed green space. She showed us this old map, like from 2009. I didn't think to question it." I tilted my head. "Didn't think to check a current zoning map? Didn't think to ask the person who lives next to it? Didn't think to notice the massive private property, no trespassing sign next to the tree you drilled into?" He looked away, embarrassed. "Yeah, I messed up. We all did." Then he hesitated before adding, "But Karen's the one who pushed this. She said if we didn't use the field for overflow, the board would look like it couldn't manage anything. It was all about optics. I already knew that. Karen wasn't running an HOA. She was running a personal PR campaign. Every decision was made for appearance, not legality. But what Stuart said next surprised me. Some of us are thinking about removing her. Like formally. She's been pushing the limits for a while now, but this crossed it. That made me pause. I hadn't expected that. I thought maybe they'd argue, or apologize, or retreat. But turning on their queen? That was a development I could use. "Well," I said slowly, "you might want to do it quickly. Because I just filed a complaint with the zoning office, and I have a meeting set with the county clerk. If this isn't cleaned up by Friday, I'm pressing trespassing charges." His face turned pale. "Understood," he said, and left without another word. That night, I installed motion-triggered lights across the edge of the field, just bright enough to make it clear the area was under surveillance. I also put up a new sign, big, bold, laminated. It read, "Private land. Trespassing will be documented and prosecuted. No threats. Just law." And beneath it, a printed QR code that linked directly to the public deed record online. Karen didn't show her face for 2 days after that. But I knew she was stewing. Somewhere in her house, she was probably scribbling a counterattack plan. The difference was, this wasn't her HOA playground anymore. The power had shifted, and she hadn't even noticed it yet. The third day after the blackout was oddly peaceful, the kind of calm that feels unnatural, like the air before a lightning storm. The field was empty now, not a single chair or trash bag left. It looked almost the way it used to, aside from the faded parking lines that still scarred the grass and the faint tire marks that had chewed through my soil. But the silence wasn't just on the field, it stretched into the neighborhood too. No early morning joggers, no dog walkers exchanging gossip, and definitely no HOA patrols driving their little golf carts around with fake authority. It was the kind of quiet that told me something was happening behind closed doors, something calculated. I wasn't wrong. I started getting subtle messages from other residents, anonymous notes, vague texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Most of them were short. "I support you." "We didn't agree to any of that." "Karen's out of control." One brave soul actually dropped off a homemade pie with a sticky note that said, "Consider this a peace offering from the sane half of the community." I didn't know who sent it, but I appreciated it more than they knew. Not for the pie itself, though it was damn good, but because it proved I wasn't the only one who saw through the nonsense. That afternoon, I decided it was time to pay a visit to the county clerk's office. Not just to file paperwork, but to make it official, on the record, that the HOA had encroached on private land, installed unpermitted structures, and caused property damage. I brought everything in a binder, organized by date, color-coded, and with tabs so clear you could find evidence faster than Karen could snap her fingers. The clerk, a woman named Joyce with the patience of a saint and the expression of someone who'd seen one HOA war too many, flipped through it all with growing eyebrows. "Let me get this straight," she said, pausing halfway through. "They hosted a catered board event with music and lights on your land and didn't ask permission?" I nodded, sipping the complimentary office coffee that tasted like cardboard and shame. "And they drew permanent lines on it?" "Used a contractor," I said. "Nephew of the HOA president. No license. No permit." Joyce let out a sigh that could have blown down a wall. "Well," she said, closing the binder with a satisfying snap, "you've got more than enough here. I'll send this to zoning enforcement and open a complaint file. If they don't remove all alterations and pay for damages, we can escalate." "Can I add something else?" I asked, sliding across a printed photo of the underground utility junction near the stage setup. "This is part of an old auxiliary line I maintain. They built right on top of it. I have documentation that proves they interfered with active infrastructure." "That's a separate violation." She stared at the photo, then looked at me with something between awe and admiration. "You planned this." "I plan to protect what's mine," I said. "They're the ones who turned it into a battlefield." By the time I got home, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but now it wasn't cheerful. It was nervous, like they were waiting for someone to get arrested or sued. Word had spread that a zoning inspection was coming. I saw a few board members gathered under a carport, whispering in tight circles. No Karen, though. She was still in hiding, and frankly, that was fine by me. Her absence gave the others room to unravel without her interference. That evening, Melanie, the board member who had been Karen's shadow for the past 2 years, knocked on my door. She looked tired, like someone who had spent the whole day rehearsing a speech she didn't want to give. I let her in. She didn't ask to sit. She just stood there in my entryway, wringing her hands and staring at the floor. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said finally. "I knew it was your land. I let her convince me that it didn't matter. That you wouldn't fight back." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What did she offer you?" She hesitated. "A promotion." "Well, not officially. She said she'd support me as her vice chair next year if I backed her ideas. Said it was time for the HOA to take more initiative in developing shared spaces. And I bought into it. I thought it would help me look good in the neighborhood." I studied her. She wasn't like Karen. There was guilt in her voice. Real regret. But that didn't mean I was going to let her off easy. "Do you think I'm the only person she's used that line on?" I asked. "Because I guarantee there's a list of names she's promised promotions to. Probably longer than the RSVP list for that ridiculous gala." Melanie winced. "You're probably right. And I know it's too late to fix things with an apology. But I wanted you to know I've submitted a letter to the board. I'm resigning at the next meeting. And I'm giving a statement about what really happened." That caught my attention. You're testifying? She nodded. It's not just you anymore. Stuart's backing me. And there's talk about calling an emergency vote to remove Karen. If we can get enough residents behind it, she's done. I had waited a long time to hear those words. Not because I wanted revenge for revenge's sake, but because I knew what kind of damage unchecked power could do. Karen wasn't just a problem for me, she was a rot in the roots of the neighborhood. All right, I said, you've got my support. But I'm not backing down. I'm still filing everything I can. That land will be returned to what it was, and someone's paying for the repairs. She nodded again and left without another word. I closed the door behind her and leaned back against it, exhaling slowly. The pieces were moving. Finally. Later that night, I walked out to the field and stared at the faint remains of their chalk lines, now dulled by time and shame. The air was cool, and the stars overhead had the kind of clarity you only notice when the power is off. I thought about what was coming. Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd come back, loud and swinging, maybe with some last-minute scheme or legal stunt. But it wouldn't work. Because now, for the first time, the board had started to realize they weren't serving the neighborhood. They were enabling a tyrant with a rhinestone clipboard and a hunger for control. And me? I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I was the line they'd crossed, and the one they couldn't erase. By the time Friday rolled around, the mood in the neighborhood had completely shifted. The polite smiles and forced waves were gone, replaced with side eyes, hushed whispers, and the kind of tension you could slice with a butter knife. Everyone was waiting for something to happen, and they knew it was coming. The inspection notice from the county had been posted on the HOA bulletin board for all to see, along with the time, 3 p.m. sharp. And wouldn't you know it, right around 2:30, HOA board members began scrambling like ants after someone kicked their hill. Folding chairs vanished, cones disappeared, and a group of 3 guys with rakes were frantically trying to erase what little remained of the painted parking lines on my field. It was as if they thought a little landscaping would make the whole thing disappear. I stood by my fence again, sipping iced tea, watching the chaos unfold. It felt like déjà vu, except this time they knew I was watching. Stuart looked up at me and nodded grimly before turning back to shovel dirt over the tire tracks. Melanie was pacing by the old portable toilet they hadn't removed, barking into her phone with an expression that screamed damage control. The desperation in the air was thicker than the summer humidity. I wasn't interfering. I didn't need to. They were unraveling on their own. At exactly 3:02, a white SUV with the county seal rolled up. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s wearing khakis, aviators, and an expression that said she didn't have time for nonsense. Her name was Lisa, and she was from zoning and code enforcement. She walked straight over to the property line, looked at the field, then at the printed sign I'd staked in front of it that read, "Private land, no trespassing," and then she turned to face the gathering board members with her clipboard in hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's weapon of choice had returned to haunt her. Lisa didn't waste time. She pulled out a measuring wheel, a GPS-enabled tablet, and began snapping pictures. Stuart offered to assist, but she politely shut him down. "If I need clarification, I'll ask. Until then, please stand back." The HOA members hovered like awkward children waiting to be scolded. A few curious neighbors had come out to watch too, standing on porches or peeking from behind hedges, pretending to water plants while clearly eavesdropping. The whole community was suddenly tuned in, and for once, I wasn't the villain of their story. Then came the best part. Lisa approached me. "You're the property owner?" she asked. I handed her my binder. She flipped through it, paused, and let out a small chuckle. "This is thorough." I shrugged. "It's been an eventful few weeks." She nodded, made a few more notes, then asked, "Has anyone from the HOA offered to repair the damage?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not a single word from them. Unless you count Melanie apologizing for getting caught." Lisa's lips tightened into a thin line. "All right," she said. "Well, I've seen enough." She turned to the board members who were now awkwardly pretending to discuss landscaping. "You violated multiple zoning ordinances," she said loudly enough for the nearby neighbors to hear. "Unpermitted use of private land, unauthorized construction, and potential interference with utility lines." She looked directly at Melanie. "There will be fines. Possibly criminal citations depending on the utility report. You'll receive a formal notice within the week. I recommend legal counsel." That shut everyone up instantly. And then, as if summoned by embarrassment itself, Karen emerged. She came strutting up the road like she'd just returned from conquering a foreign country, wearing a new pair of sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat like a celebrity dodging paparazzi. In her hand? Of course, another clipboard. Her signature. She walked straight past the stunned board, right up to Lisa, and said, "I demand to speak to your supervisor." Lisa didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you are not in a position to demand anything. If you continue to interfere, I'll have to file a separate obstruction report." Karen laughed. Actually laughed. "This is all a big misunderstanding. This land was unclaimed. That man," she pointed at me like I was some villain in a courtroom drama, "has been difficult from the start. He's always been against community progress. This is retaliation. You'll see." Lisa took a deep breath and then calmly said, "I have satellite imagery, time-stamped records, and a certified deed. It's his land. The only misunderstanding here is your assumption that your HOA authority extends past your subdivision boundaries." Karen's face turned a color somewhere between lobster red and overripe tomato. She turned to the crowd that had gathered, suddenly realizing she didn't have the control she thought she did. "He cut our power," she shouted. "He endangered us." I finally stepped forward, still holding my tea. "No, Karen. I rerouted my own line on my own property. I made sure it was isolated. If your illegal wiring tapped into it, that's on your contractor nephew. And if you want to sue me for not powering your gala, go right ahead." The silence that followed was absolute. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once, she had nothing to say. Lisa cleared her throat. "Unless anyone else has something to add, I'll be filing my report. Have a good day." She turned and walked back to her SUV, and just like that, it was over. But the damage was done. The residents had seen it. The board had been publicly humiliated. Karen, once untouchable, stood alone at the edge of the field looking like someone who'd just been evicted from her own ego. I walked past her on my way back to the porch. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smirk. I just said, "Next time, maybe knock." That night, word spread like wildfire. Screenshots of the county inspector's report summary appeared in the neighborhood group chat. Someone uploaded a video of Karen's meltdown. The comments were brutal. A petition was started, an emergency HOA meeting to vote on leadership removal. By midnight, it had enough digital signatures to trigger the clause. And by morning, someone taped a flyer to Karen's front door, "Special board vote, Saturday at noon." I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, because I was satisfied. This wasn't just about paint lines or a ruined field. It was about standing your ground against entitled arrogance, against people who think rules apply only to others. Karen had poked a bear and expected it to roll over. Instead, she'd woken up an engineer with a circuit diagram and a fuse box. And the power wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. The sun rose early on Saturday, and with it came a strange kind of buzz in the neighborhood. People were up before their sprinklers. Lawn chairs were being dragged out to porches not for relaxation, but for observation. Something rare was happening in this HOA-governed suburb, something you usually only hear about in dramatic emails and Reddit threads. The residents weren't coming together for a bake sale or a pool cleaning party. They were coming for a reckoning. The emergency HOA vote was scheduled for noon, but by 10 o'clock, you could already see neighbors walking with purpose, clipboards in hand, documents folded under their arms. They weren't just participants anymore. They were witnesses. Some of them were tired of being ruled by fear, by fake citations, by a woman whose authority came from volume and not validity. And today they had the receipt. I sat on my porch with my second cup of coffee, watching the whole thing unfold like the opening act of a play I'd written. The field was untouched that morning, calm and quiet again like nothing had ever happened. The only visible trace of the past chaos was my freshly mounted metal sign on the fence, now welded into place with concrete anchors. It simply said, "Private property, zoned, surveyed, and staying mine." It wasn't flashy, but it didn't have to be. It was the period at the end of a sentence Karen had refused to stop writing. Around 11, Stuart came walking up my driveway. He wasn't alone. Melanie trailed behind him, holding a folder. Neither of them looked overly confident, but they looked ready, like soldiers walking into a courtroom. Stuart gave me a small nod. "It's happening," he said. "We have the numbers. But she's going to fight it. She's called in her cousin, her old HOA mentor, and probably a lawyer who doesn't know what they're stepping into." I set down my cup. "She can bring a parade if she wants," I said. "You've got the truth. And the truth's a lot harder to argue with when it's been made public." Melanie held up the folder. We included everything. Pictures, statements, the zoning inspector's summary, the unauthorized paint job, even screenshots from the group chat showing her mocking residents who asked questions. Stuart added, "And your aerial map. That binder you gave us? Gold. We scanned it, made copies, and passed them out last night. This morning, half the neighborhood was reading it over breakfast." I couldn't help but smile. They were doing it. After months, maybe years, of letting Karen run unchecked, the board and the residents were finally waking up. All they needed was a spark. All it took was one wrong decision painted in white lines across the wrong field. At noon sharp, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Not with cars. Those were parked legally this time, but with residents. More than I'd seen at any previous event, even more than the disastrous gala. Chairs had been lined up outside the clubhouse, facing a folding table where the board sat, a lineup of tension and faux professionalism. Karen was seated in the middle, flanked by two members who looked like they regretted showing up. She was wearing another bold hat, this one wide-brimmed and decorated with sunflowers, as if trying to distract from the metaphorical storm cloud hanging over her head. She started the meeting the way she always did, with fake warmth and exaggerated smiles. "Thank you all for attending on such short notice," she said into the mic. "It's always a joy to see our community come together, especially when important issues arise." There was no applause. Just a wall of silence and a few unimpressed coughs. "I understand some concerns have been raised," she continued, her voice faltering slightly, "regarding the use of a nearby field, and I would like to clarify that all actions were taken with the best intentions and under the assumption that the land was." Stuart stood up, interrupting her mid-sentence. "We're not here for a clarification, Karen. We're here to vote." Karen blinked. "Excuse me." Melanie stood beside him, her voice calm but firm. "You were served notice of this meeting's purpose. A motion has been introduced to remove you as president of the HOA due to misconduct, abuse of authority, and willful violation of zoning and private property laws." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She scanned the faces in the crowd, looking for allies. But most of them were staring back at her with crossed arms, frowns, or expressions that said, "We're done." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Can we vote already?" followed by murmurs of agreement. Stuart raised his hand. "All in favor of removing Karen as president effective immediately, say aye." It was like a wave. "Aye" erupted across the lot, echoing off the houses. Hands shot up. Even a few board members who had previously backed Karen raised their hands with visible relief. And opposed. Silence. Karen looked like she'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She stood up, reached for her clipboard, then dropped it. The paper scattered like feathers across the pavement. Melanie cleared her throat. Motion passed. "You are hereby removed from the board, Karen." Security will escort you off HOA property if you resist. A few gasps rose. Karen stumbled back, as if someone had physically pulled the ground from under her. She turned toward the crowd. "You're all going to regret this," she snapped. "You think you're better off without me? Good luck managing anything without my leadership." A few residents actually laughed. I stepped forward from the back, walking slowly until I stood at the edge of the crowd. Karen's eyes found me immediately. There was fury, yes, but also fear. Not of me, but of irrelevance. I didn't say much. Just 4 words. "Don't paint on property." She turned, humiliated, and stormed off. A few people clapped. Not for me, not for her leaving, but for the idea that maybe, finally, this neighborhood could breathe again. In the days that followed, the board reorganized. Stewart stepped in as interim president. Melanie was reinstated as secretary with the condition that all decisions be made transparent and subject to public vote. The fines arrived from the county and were paid using HOA reserve funds, funds Karen had previously used for vanity projects. The field was cleaned, reseeded, and left alone, just as it should be. One afternoon, a new resident stopped me near my gate. "You're the guy with the field, right? The one who cut the power." I smiled. "That's me." He laughed. "Man, I heard that story before I even moved in. You're kind of a legend around here." I nodded, walking back toward my porch. Sometimes all it takes is one bad line for people to finally redraw the whole map.